Hey class, Bob here again for part 3 of sensitivity analysis. What we want to do now is look at this third part of the sensitivity report that deals with the constraints. And I'm going to walk you through the meaning of these numbers, and then we're going to look at the spreadsheet, manipulate a little bit, and prove to ourselves that these numbers are correct. The first thing you see here is the final value. This is the left-hand side value of each of those three constraints. Let's look and confirm that. So this is the same thing. Okay. The left-hand side of a less than constraint typically represents the amount of a particular resource that we're using. The right-hand side represents the amount we have available. And looking at this real quick, we can recognize that these last two constraints are binding constraints because we're using every bit of the capacity of those two. However, this first constraint, we're only using 5, and it has a limit of 6, so we have a little bit of slack there, and that shows up in the sensitivity report here. Let's see. Well, actually, the slack doesn't, I guess. I take that back. Let's talk next about the shadow price right here. Okay, the shadow price is what would happen to profits in this example. What would happen to profits if I was to increase the right-hand side of that constraint by 1? So let's look at that 0, and let's make sense out of that. What that's saying is if I increase the right-hand side, which is now a 6, if I increase it to a 7, then nothing happens to profit. It doesn't change. It changes by 0. And that should be intuitive. If we're already not using all of this resource, what good does it do to give us more resources? We can prove it to ourselves if we want. I can change that 6 to a 7 and solve the problem again. And of course the problem and the profit are all the same again. Okay? Let's change that back to a 6 and hit save. Oops. Now, meant to hit solve. Now, it's different with the second. It has a shadow price of 2, which means that profit will go up. This will go to 48 if this goes to 20. So let's prove that to ourselves. Let's make that a 20. Let's go to solver. Solve it again. Oops. And there's that 48. Now if I go to 21, it should go to 50. And in fact it does. Now that won't keep going indefinitely. It won't keep raising this by 2 indefinitely, because what will happen eventually is another constraint will become the binding constraint. In other words, if you kept giving that employee more hours, eventually you'd run out of materials. Does that make sense? So think about that. You're going to have to increase all of your resources at some point. So this shadow price will only continue for a certain range, and that range is actually given here as well. You see this right-hand side constraint is 19, the allowable increase is 5, the allowable decrease is 1, and what that means is that 2, that shadow price, is only relevant, only applicable for a right-hand side value between 18 and 24. So let's prove that to ourselves, and we'll with that wrap up the sensitivity analysis material here. So remember, the allowable increase was 5, I believe, so I should be able to make that a 24 and continue to see that gain in profit. Let's solve that. And let's see, it's right at that point where things change. So I think that's probably some fraction in there. So let's change it to like 23.5. Solve it again. And it's manipulating the numbers. What's happening as you approach that point is the solution is changing. And I think we have to make it an integer programming problem for this solution to well, no, that's true. I'm sorry. I'm having to think through this as I talk here. But this keeps going up by 2 as we increase the right-hand side, and of course the solution changes because we have a different feasible solution space. Sorry about that. I had to think that through. But let me make that a 24 again and solve it. Okay. And that has continued to go up by 2 as we've increased the right-hand side by 1 each time. But that should not go up by 2 when we go beyond that limit. And that's what I was trying to prove. So to kind of back up a second, let's look at the sensitivity report. It says that the allowable increase is 5. That increase of 2 in profit is applicable as long as you don't increase this 19 by more than 5. So the profit will go up by 2 until this hits 24, and then it won't necessarily go up by 2 when you raise this to 25 and so on. So let's prove that. Okay, so I'm going to raise that to 25, and it's not going to go up to 58, I don't think. Okay, and in fact it did not. It stayed the same. It stayed the same. So this third constraint is preventing additional profits. So that's the meaning of that range you see in the sensitivity report. This number is only relevant across the range indicated. Okay, so between 18 and 24, this number 2 is relevant. So if I change that to an 18, you might be thinking, well, what has happened if you decrease it? Well, the profit's going to go down by 2. So let's go back to where it was a 19. Solve it. Remember, it was a 46. If I make it an 18, that should go to a 44. And in fact, it does. And if I go to 17, that 2 is no longer relevant. So I think that'll change by something other than 2. And in fact, it did. Okay, so that's how you interpret that sensitivity report. Now, what in the world do you care? Why do you care? Well, again, I mentioned this earlier, but if that 19, raising it to 20, increases my profit by 2, that tells me what the value in procuring additional resources is. So if it raises my profit by 2, and I can get additional resources for a cost of less than 2, then I would want to continue to do that all day long. But I can't do that all day long because eventually another constrained resource kicks in and I've got to increase that as well. So that's the meaning of the interpretation of those sensitivity reports. And with that, we are going to conclude.